Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to put on our lab coats, so to speak, and conduct a linguistic investigation into one of the most talked about topics out there, the evolution of a president's speech.
Okay, wow. The late, great Hannibal Lecter. And something about sharks versus electrocution? Look, when speech gets that bizarre, it absolutely makes headlines. But we're here to ask a different question. From a clinical standpoint, what is actually going on here? So, we're going to tune out all the political noise, all the talking heads, and approach this like a true forensic investigation. We're breaking out the tools of speech pathology and neurology to see what the evidence really tells us.
All right, here's our game plan. We'll look at the speeches causing all the buzz, set up our framework for analysis, establish a clear baseline from his earlier years, and then track the shift in his speech patterns right up to today. We'll see what the experts think and figure out what it would take to get some real clarity.
First up, Section 1, the speeches sparking debate. Let's start with the actual evidence that got everyone talking in the first place.
So you've got things like confusing Biden with Obama, talking about preventing World War II, stage 9 cancer. Look, any single one of these could just be a slip-up, a gaffe. But what makes clinicians and speech pathologists sit up and take notice is when it's not just a one-off. It's the pattern of confusion that starts to look like a trail of breadcrumbs worth following.
Okay, so now that we have the what, let's get into the how. Section 2, a framework for analysis. Before we can make sense of those breadcrumbs, we need to understand the toolkit. What are the specific things that experts are actually looking for in measuring?
First up is something called speech linearity. Now, this sounds fancy, but it's really pretty simple. Think of a conversation like a train on a track. Is it going from point A to point B in a straight line, or is it constantly jumping the rails, going off on tangents, or just sort of breaking down midway? That's what clinicians are tracking.
And then we have lexical errors. This is all about word choice. Think of it like an archer aiming for a bullseye. How often does the speaker hit the exact word they're aiming for? Or do they miss by substituting another word, messing up the pronunciation, or sometimes, just making up a word entirely?
And this is absolutely crucial. This isn't about guesswork or political jabs. This is the official playbook, the three-step process from organizations like the Alzheimer's Association. First, you figure out the level of impairment. Second, you identify the specific type of symptoms you're seeing. And only then, after all that, do you even begin to think about what the cause might be. It's a rigorous, step-by-step process.
All right, Section 3, establishing a baseline. You can't measure change if you don't know where you started, right? Every good forensic case needs a before picture. So let's hop in the time machine and look at the data from the 80s all the way through the 2000s.
Okay, take a look at this chart. For 3 solid decades, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, the numbers are rock solid. Words per minute, stable. Lexical errors, those word-finding mistakes, stable. Grammatical errors, stable. Topic shifts, you guessed it, stable. The style was always unique for sure, but the underlying machinery, the cognitive linguistic engine, was running incredibly consistently.
So the big takeaway here is this. We have a very clear, very steady, data-backed baseline. This isn't just someone's opinion or a gut feeling. This is what the numbers say. This is our official before picture.
And now for Section 4, a shift in speech patterns. This is where things start to get really, really interesting. Let's fast forward to 2015 and look at what's happened since.
Okay, now this table visually captures the whole story. You can literally see the moment the data starts to diverge from that stable baseline we just established. Look at the trends. There's a clear quantifiable shift, and you can see it really starts to accelerate in the 2020s. We're moving from a pattern of stable to something very different.
Let's put a hard number on this, a 200% increase. Let that sink in for a second. From 2020 to 2024, the data shows a 200% spike in grammatical errors. We're talking about a huge jump in things like sentences that just trail off or thoughts that seem to crumble mid-sentence.
And here's a perfect example of what that sounds like in the wild. I have no cognitive, she may have a cognitive problem, but I've done cognitive tests. You can literally hear the grammatical structure breaking down. The sentence gets tangled up, it stutters. It's exactly the kind of fragmentation that 200% increase is measuring.
And it's not just the sentence structure. Remember those lexical errors we talked about, the word finding? Well, take a look at this. The rate has more than doubled from that baseline we set. In clinical terms, that's a big red flag.
it can point to a decline in something called semantic retrieval, which is just a fancy way of saying the brain's filing system for words isn't working as smoothly as it used to.
We're going to let him frack like a duck. This is a textbook example of what a speech pathologist would call a phonemic paraphasia. It's a sound swap. The k sound from quack gets mixed up with frack. It's a tiny little slip, but it's a specific type of error that points to a brief misfire in the brain's language processing.
What's fascinating is that this isn't just a smooth, straight line downwards. The data shows these distinct kinks in the trend line, specific points in time where things take a noticeable turn. The first one appears around 2016. Post-2020, factual errors double, and some analysts even see another shift after the assassination attempt in 2024. These changes seem to cluster around periods of intense stress and major life events.
Okay, Section 5, experts weigh in. So we've laid out the evidence, we've seen the baseline, we've seen the shift, we've seen the numbers. Now, what does it all mean? Let's bring in the experts to help us connect the dots.
And this is where you get a real debate in the expert community. On one side, you have linguists who say, hey, this is just his style. It's a lifelong pattern, kind of a conversational weave. It's confusing, maybe, but it's not new. But then you have another camp, including many physicians, who look at the hard data, that 200% increase, and say, no, this is a quantifiable clinical shift. This goes way beyond just a personality trait.
And of course, no clinician would look at this in a vacuum. You have to consider the full context. You've got a family history of Alzheimer's, which significantly increases risk. You have a known cardiovascular profile, and we know vascular issues can impact brain function. And then there's age and intense chronic stress. All of these are critical pieces of the puzzle that a diagnostician would have to factor in.
So, where does that leave us? Section 6, the path to clarity. We have compelling data, but we also have conflicting interpretations. So what's the verdict? More importantly, how could we even get to one?
Well, the consensus among experts isn't a diagnosis. It's a call for a diagnosis. They're basically saying, look, the only way to stop speculating and get a real definitive answer is through a proper independent evaluation. That means a full neuropsych exam, brain imaging like an MRI or PET scan, and a deep dive by a speech-language pathologist. That's the clinical gold standard.
And that leaves us with a really big and, honestly, a pretty difficult question. It's not just about one person or one election. As our leaders serve later and later in life, how do we as a society draw the line between an individual's right to medical privacy and the public's need to know about the cognitive fitness of the people in the highest positions of power? That's a conversation we're all going to have.